The fact that a future exists is not a guarantee that all will have access to it. It's something so obvious, and yet we did not understand it.
You can tell that we're emerging from winter because this is the first time in forever that I've been able to film in the daylight. I've made a couple of videos about Persona 3. Today, I just want to discuss the DLC epilogue of Persona 3 Reload, which is a 2024 remake of a PS2 game. The DLC is called Episode Aigis, and it follows the anti-shadow suppression weapon, Aigis, as she goes through her Pinocchio arc and becomes a metaphysical girl. Spoiler alert, but I regret to inform you that as a bona fide Persona 3 lover, a P3 stan, I was immensely disappointed. I was dripping in anticipation for this DLC to release, because despite playing the iteration of Persona 3 that this content was originally written for, Persona 3 has a storied history that I don't want to explain again. I have 2 other videos where I talk about the release order. Feel free to go watch those all the way through and then come back here. Despite playing Persona 3 FES and being aware to some extent what this epilogue was about, I never actually played it, and I didn't know how the story unfolded. I knew the basics. Aigis is the main character. It picks up a couple weeks after the events of the main game, and it's much more combat focused. That's all I knew going in. Despite this awareness, I had no idea how bored I was gonna be. Obviously, we'll get into the plot later, which, due to the nature of this discussion, will contain spoilers for specifically how Reload ends, and of course the DLC in its entirety, but we can knock out my gripes at the top. I was so vigilant for a sale because I didn't want to pay $55 for the expansion pass, because you can't just buy the Aigis content on its own. You have to buy it with some skins that I don't need and some different background music that I don't want. So the price is artificially inflated in that way because it's bundled. So I waited for a sale, and I'm still mad that I paid 30 of my gay dollars for this. Persona as a franchise is a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei, Atlus's flagship property. The first 2 Persona entries bear a lot of similarity to the core SMT games, but the third entry introduced social sim elements which serve to mutually enhance combat. This core gameplay loop is what paved the way for the franchise's future success. I find this balance to be particularly satisfying. Persona employs a calendar system. You can spend your days hanging out with friends, studying, working a part-time job, fighting your demons at night. They really have it all. Typical high school behavior. Time is the main currency, a finite resource that you need to manage with calculated precision to see as much of the game as possible in a single run. And these games aren't short. I clocked in at about 85 hours for Reload, and I didn't even finish all of the social links. There's more for me to do. A key benefit of this sort of system is that no matter what, as long as you are interacting with the game and making a decision, you are always moving forward, always improving, always being rewarded in some way that either makes the social or combat elements easier, whether or not your run is perfect. Reload follows a player insert silent protagonist whose canon name is Makoto Yuki. That's what we'll be using. He's a high schooler who is likely dealing with depression. It's never really said outright, but there's a strong case for that argument based on the text. Throughout the school year, he becomes closer with his dorm mates as they team up in their fight against the shadows using their personas, powerful manifestations of the psyche, which they use to dispel the dark hour, a supernatural phenomenon where time freezes at midnight and only some people are able to lucidly experience what is happening. As the plot thickens and the stakes rise, they discover that an avatar of death named Nyx is responsible for all of this, and they deal with her. The day is saved, blah, blah, blah. You get it. Makoto very much is the chosen one. He has the wildcard ability, which lets him access and switch through a roster of personas freely, making him the strongest member of the group. Death, apathy, and the inability to progress towards your desires are the main themes that Reload contends with, and as the game progresses, Makoto is able to rise to these challenges after building a vibrant community that he seeks to protect, thus finding meaning in his own life. This main plot is called The Journey in English. In the original Japanese, it's called Episode Yourself. The epilogue follows suit. either being called The Answer or Episode Aigis. In Reload, they've preserved the original Japanese name, Episode Aigis, but if I switch back and forth between the two, just know I'm using both names to refer to the epilogue. The themes remain similar. After about 10 months of continuous fighting on top of their daily lives as students, it's a real Hannah Montana switch up. The group is forced to slow down, and their year of immense joy and painful sacrifice is finally catching up to them. The game takes place on March 31st. In Japan, the school year ends in March, and students move up to the next grade in April. It's also time for everybody to move out of the dorms, which includes deciding what to do with the belongings of the friends who didn't make it to March. Death is still the main theme, both in its literal meaning, but also the major arcana cards meaning in tarot, which makes up a significant portion of Persona's iconography. As a card, it generally represents endings, and it doesn't have to be the ending of a life, implying new beginnings that come with that death. In this way, the narrative contends with lives lost from multiple angles. Time moves us all forward, and they will not be able to act as their little chosen family as they were before. Episode Aigis opens with a big cutscene teasing some of the action and revelations that the game has in store for us, complete with a dramatic voiceover from Aigis saying,
"There was little we did understand. We didn't know how to use the key to unlock our future."
Which is essentially the thesis statement of the story that the other main narrative components are built off of. This intro is about 90 seconds. It's a little bit more bombastic, and it's immediately juxtaposed with Fuka Yamagishi, the party's navigator and general voice of reason, on the phone with Yukari Takeba, who is essentially the leading character for the first act of Reload. In this conversation, they handle their grief in different ways. Fuka is prepared to face the aftermath, while Yukari is at cram school avoiding the fallout. And again, they're in between school years, so I'm taking this to mean that she really doesn't want to deal with anything. It's a moment of quiet domesticity. The first time in months that these characters' lives haven't been touched by supernatural entities threatening to destroy the planet. Episode Aigis asks these questions. How do you move on? And what does it mean to live in the after? Aigis is the central figure, and she becomes a second chosen one, a chosen second, a spare, Prince Harry, when she herself awakens to the wild card. March 31st begins repeating, trapping the characters in their own Groundhog Day time loop, and it's likely in relation to her newfound powers. A set of stairs open in the dorms. They lead down to the Desert of Doors, our new hub space for dungeons to crawl, and we're introduced to a new character named Metis, another anti-shadow weapon, and allegedly Aigis' sister, who conveniently has no memories because amnesia is the easiest justification for maintaining suspense. Despite this, Metis is also the keeper of all information relevant to their situation. She just doesn't know why she knows it. In order to escape the dorm, the party has to explore the abyss of time and find the answer to why they're stuck. From a gameplay perspective, the dungeons are very similar to the base games, but instead of climbing up a tower called Tartarus, you descend further down, and it's even suggested that the abyss exists because it's where Tartarus stored itself outside of the Dark Hour. For the next 15 to 20 hours, depends on what difficulty you're playing, Episode Aigis takes you through these 7 doors that all look the same, facing enemies that are the same as in the base game. It's really boring, it's uneventful. The original Persona 3 was criticized for not having enough dungeon variety. You're stuck in one tower that functions the same way all the way up, so they really revamped each block of Tartarus to at least visually differentiate the sections from one another. They also added certain event floors just to break up the sameness of that gameplay more. So it's interesting that they heard and received the criticism about the dungeons being too repetitive and then just threw that out the window when it came to Episode Aigis. Combat essentially becomes the sole focus, which also disrupts Reload's gameplay loop, gutting the social links and reducing the main story to heavy lore dumps near the end of the DLC's runtime, broken up between some boss battles. The inertia of time can't push you along. There's no concept of rest. Nothing is limited. You can leave the dungeon whenever you want to heal up your party in the dorm with minimal consequences. They added some short dorm social events, which I think is nice. That's a feature that they also added for Reload, but it does feel a little odd to indulge in a film with the girls in your destroyed living space and the literal stairs to hell within eyeline of your television set. You know what I mean? There's an incongruity there. Where's the urgency? What's propelling us forward? The scope of episode Aigis is pretty limited. When they originally made episode Aigis on the PS2, the developers were faced with much greater technological limitations, and that's evident in how they seemingly wanted to reuse as much as possible. The enemies are all the same. They only introduce a couple of new location types. Metis's character build is quite similar to another party member's. She has a different learn set, but they both wield giant axes and have no weaknesses or resistances. The DLC almost entirely takes place in the dorm, and despite not being able to leave until the time loop is broken, the game has to justify giving you access to Polonia Mall so that they don't have to make a new shop area, for example. Are the 20 hours of dungeon crawling necessary to tell this story? Can episode Aigis justify its runtime? Because I've set it up in a really optimistic light. I put my essayist hat on, and I feel like I've delivered a very strong pitch for what this DLC could achieve. But it's really a nothing burger, and then they have to tack on a bunch of lore in the last couple hours to make you feel like you did something. Many of these issues read as though the devs wanted to adapt this source material without having much interest in improving upon it, which is what made Reload so successful for me. It was a smooth, balanced experience. Episode Aigis could have been a movie, and I know that's a big ask. It would be crazy for a property like this to have a franchise of movies that you could attach this story to. It just feels like they didn't care to improve the source material, and they can lean on the idea of, we wanted to keep it faithful to excuse its mediocrity. Throughout my theater degree, we were often posed with the questions, why this play? Why now? As a means of encouraging us to justify our work and its necessity and why it needs to exist. In posing those questions, I struggle to figure out what episode Aigis contributes, especially when at regular pricing, it's more than half of the cost of the base game, but offers a fraction of the value. I've established that the aim is to make it to the bottom of each of the 7 doors. When you do make it to the bottom, you're rewarded with scenes from the party's past around the time that they awakened to their personas. Some people complain that there's no big boss fights before getting these vignettes, but the game is so combat oriented that I honestly don't care. You already have to do so much work to get to Ken trying to explain to the police that his mom died in a persona accident. The 3 outliers are Fuka, who just doesn't have a scene because she awakens during the main story. I also just don't think they wanted to write her one. And then the DLC in its entirety has no idea what to do with Junpei and Koromaru, so their scene is together. We're on to the big spoiler portion of the video, which will spoil things, including both the ending of Reload and the ending of episode Aigis. If you care not to know, this is your opportunity to subscribe and watch another video of mine. Thank you so much. After going through the 7 doors, the game realizes that it doesn't have a plot, so it contrives a MacGuffin to really pick the momentum back up. Each of the characters have a key, and when all of their keys come together, they'll have a key that can unlock a door. I was trying to be vague about it. I don't know how successful I was, but the main character dies at the end of Reload to seal Nyx. The player knows that, but the party has no idea what actually happened. It seemed like everything was fine, and then his health began to rapidly decline at the beginning of March. The group still needs to clear out his belongings, and it seems like their collective grief, especially Aigis's, is what caused the time dilation in the first place. Aigis's "we made it to the bottom of the door" scene isn't about her awakening to her original persona, but it's about her unlocking the wild card. Aigis's personal motivation as a character is also heavily intertwined with Makoto. She basically sealed the manifestation of death in him when he was a young child, and because of this, she felt a sense of duty to protect him, almost as a means for atoning the burden that she placed on him. That's intrinsic to her being, and now that he's dead, she has to find something new. Aigis eventually is able to cry towards the end of Reload, symbolizing her becoming more human-like, but it's noted during the events of the DLC that she's reverted back to being more robotic. So the DLC is about everyone's grief, but it's about Aigis's grief a little bit more. Back to the key shenanigans. Once they're stuck, Makoto's room is sealed along with the front doors. Once they achieve the master key, if they choose to unlock the front doors, they'll return to the present. If they unlock Makoto's room, they'll go back to before he died. The group is divided over this. Akihiko and Ken want to respect Makoto's sacrifice and move on. Yukari and Mitsuru want to go back and hope to have a shot at saving him. And Junpei and Koromaru, again, don't have anything to do, so they're undecided. They make up a fake centrist POV to give them a reason to participate. With the group divided, this means drama has been manufactured and now they have to fight. Aigis and Metis pair up against all of them, stealing their keys and basically killing them, but in a very end of Sailor Moon season 1 kind of way, where like they're dead, but they're gonna come back. It's at this point that the group is able to more openly talk about what they've been going through. Once everyone is revived, Yukari really takes focus, and I actually found her dialogue to be quite moving. It's clear that she'd really been pushing them down, and then she totally just cracks in front of the group. She also admits that she wished she would have been granted the wildcard ability, which is an interesting new perspective. Junpei has a little bit of jealousy towards Makoto during the main story, but that more so has to do with the fact that he's the leader. There aren't really critical thoughts about Makoto being able to play Pokemon while the rest of them are playing a different game. I thought it was cool that Yukari would have wanted it. Persona 3-2, where Yukari is the main character. Just kidding. Based on this DLC, I don't trust them to continue this story anymore. Anyways, Aigis realizes that there's a different answer to the key problem, and it's the stupid doors to the mall. Why wouldn't we think that? Oh my god, I literally thought that was wrong, so I just looked up the cutscenes again, and it's true. They unlock the door to the mall, and I guess like perhaps the justification is that it's a fake door invented by the reality, and they have to do some sort of AI Somnium Files Nirvana initiative to puzzle solve in an abstract way to make stuff happen. So she uses the key on that door, and then another big door opens in the abyss of time that's spewing with darkness. Once they go through that, it takes them to outer space, and they watch a vision of Makoto performing the Great Seal on Nyx, sacrificing himself to protect the planet. Metis realizes that Makoto might not have wanted to keep Nyx in, but to keep something out. So the group fights Erebus, an ugly cat dog looking manifestation of the darkness that's trying to break the seal. It's like if Nyx was far less compelling. There could be like a Greek mythology link here, since Erebus and Nyx are married in myth, and they're the same concept from different angles. Nyx is night, Erebus is darkness. I don't know. And having a little Greek mythology Easter egg does not necessarily make it good. They defeat the big bad, they use the key, and they have the answer about how their friend died. So they at least have closure in that regard. That's quote unquote the answer, in case you guys weren't picking it up. Aigis also realizes that Metis is not a real girl. She's a manifestation of Aigis's emotional self, and they reunite once this is realized. Metis dissolves into beautiful pink magic, and the extra military equipment that Aigis has been wearing falls off. It's revealed that all of the magic in this world is adjacent to the shadows, including personas, and Metis is also born from that. Through the journey, Aigis finds the will to live, but now she fears that she's gonna die because having the wild card initiates a journey, and Makoto's ended once he discovered his meaning for life. Metis offers Aigis some sage advice. If she wants to be with Makoto again, she could always just Jill herself. And I didn't like that. That's not helpful or productive. The group wakes up in the dorm. It's now April 1st. So the time loop has officially been broken, but the gag is Aigis will not wake up. The party brings her to her room, and Fuka, resident queen of Comp Sci, we love a woman in STEM, sees that all of Aigis's circuits are fried, and she's presumed dead. But seconds later, she wakes up. A real super graphic, ultra modern, ooh you got me la la laing, hyper sexy top to bottom girl, which also, like, gender is presentational. Do you ever think about the fact that Aigis is naked? This is her naked body. She doesn't have skin. She's not human, not exactly a girl, not yet a woman, but alive by some mystical means. The group moves out. Aigis locks up the dorm because they have to really punch home that the key is a symbol that is supposed to mean something. I guess maybe Miss Kirijo, she doesn't want to be a landlord, so she's getting her conglomerate to sell the place. I don't know why they can't live there for the next next year, but that part is truly not important. Yukari also asks Aigis to be her roommate next year, which is very endearing. The end. I had more fun talking about it than I did playing it. I was so bored that I switched from normal to easy to peaceful for the difficulty, and then I just watched a cutscene movie because after the 5th door, it really wasn't sparking joy. And you know, as I said, time is finite, and there are other things I could be doing, like playing games that I like. I was really looking forward to playing this and getting something new from Persona 3, but I was really disappointed. And in a way, I'm kind of the dream demographic. I adore a story about human robots. I loved Ex Machina. I appreciate the works of Yoko Taro. I've sat through a lot of his smut. That's how interested in these stories I am. And I just feel like episode Aigis is shallow at best, unfortunately. No wonder they didn't want to put FemC in the game. They barely wanted to work on this. There are decent moments for sure, but it's obvious the whole time that Metis is supposed to be a reflection of Aigis. She serves a very similar function that Pharos and Ryoji did for the protagonist, but without the intrigue. I didn't find Metis particularly compelling. I appreciated Aigis's emotional exploration for sure, and how her own rejection of humanity birthed Metis as a more childish, rambunctious version of Aigis's inner self. I also think they had an interesting opportunity to explore phasing in a new chosen one, but all of the mystical key drama really muddies the focus. I think the party infighting was largely done because otherwise the characters really would not have much to do. I like the ideas of vignettes as a reward to get a little bit more individual character exploration. I enjoyed Ken's. Mitsuru's is probably the best because it's the lore heaviest. It's about her childhood and how her family was involved with the shadows and why she's such a source of information in the main game. I really enjoyed that. But truly, in conclusion, there is not enough content to necessitate the runtime. The only interesting stuff happens at the end and everything else is contrived. Anywho, that's kind of all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Did you play episode Aigis? Did you enjoy the DLC? Episode Aigis, I will say, is the precursor to the double release format of Persona games because they do an initial version and then they do a more advanced remake of the same game. And I think that's something that Persona fans especially are primed for. A lot of people think that they're going to do a second release of Metaphor ReFantazio with some additions to the game. I don't think they're going to do that, but it's not impossible. I do think episode Aigis set the stage for these remakes. In Persona 4 Golden, you have Marie. People don't seem to really resonate with the additions in Golden, but I think Persona 5 Royal fixes a game that is mid at best. That video is one that I have in the drafts. If you want to see it, let me know. Are you a big Persona fan? Which Persona is your favorite? In terms of additional DLC story content, is there a favorite of yours? I usually don't pick up the DLC for a lot of games, but like the Tales of Arise DLC is kind of on my radar. And yeah, that's everything for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.